Have you ever felt like a decoration at your own celebration? I stood frozen as my father raised his glass, not to me, but to my sister. He announced that she was the only child worth celebrating tonight. Silence followed, but no one objected. I walked out like a ghost, but I did not leave empty-handed. That night, I opened the door to something that would make every single person who looked down on me regret their silence. My name is Leah Martin. I am 24 years old, and earlier today, I graduated at the very top of my class as a certified paramedic. I have spent the last 2 years learning how to restart a human heart, how to stop arterial bleeding in under 60 seconds, and how to hold the hand of a stranger as they take their final breath. I deal in blood, trauma, and the raw, unfiltered reality of life and death. But tonight, standing in the middle of the Marigold Terrace in Charlotte, North Carolina, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was invisible. The venue was suffocatingly expensive. It was the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like vanilla and old money, and the servers moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts. My parents had rented out the main ballroom, a space lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. When I first walked in, I looked for my name. I scanned the room for a sign that said, "Congratulations, Leah," or even just a simple class of 2026. Instead, I found a banner stretching 10 feet across the back wall, printed in elegant, gold leaf typography. It read, "Celebrating the Martin Legacy." There was no mention of graduation, there was no mention of emergency medicine, and there was certainly no mention of me. I stood there for a moment, clutching my small clutch bag, feeling the familiar coldness settle in my stomach. The Martin Legacy, that was the brand. My father, Gordon Martin, was a senior partner at Holloway & Crane LLP, one of the most ruthless law firms in the state. My mother, Diane, was the perfect partner's wife, a woman who treated social standing like a contact sport. And then there was the guest list. I looked around the room and saw 50 people, maybe more. I recognized my father's junior associates, his golf buddies, and a few of my mother's charity board members. I saw clients who paid my father $500 an hour to keep them out of jail. I did not see a single one of my friends, no one from my cohort, no one from the station. I walked toward the tables, looking for my seat. I expected to be near the front, perhaps not at the head of the table, but somewhere visible. I kept walking, past the centerpieces of white orchids, past the bottles of vintage champagne chilling in silver buckets. I finally found my name card on a small, round table tucked into the far corner, right next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a server kicked the door open with a tray of appetizers, a blast of hot air and the smell of dish soap hit me. I was sitting with my cousin's ex-husband and 2 paralegals from my father's firm who looked like they had been forced to attend. I sat down and smoothed the fabric of my dress. I had bought it myself with the money I saved from picking up extra shifts. It was simple. Navy blue, professional. Across the room, near the head table, my younger sister Savannah was glowing. She was 20 years old, wearing a shimmering champagne gown that probably cost more than my entire tuition. Savannah had just been accepted into a prestigious law school, the kind of place my father called a dream factory. She had not even started classes yet, but she was already the star of the show. The dinner service began, and I ate in silence. The paralegals ignored me, too busy discussing a merger case. I watched my parents at the head table. They were laughing, touching arms, basking in the attention. They looked like royalty holding court. I felt like a spectator at my own funeral. Then came the clinking of the glass, the sharp, piercing sound that silenced the room. My father stood up. He looked impressive. I had to give him that. He had the kind of charisma that won cases before the jury even sat down. He held a flute of champagne in one hand and adjusted his silk tie with the other. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice booming with practiced warmth. "Tonight is a special night for the Martin family. We are gathered here to celebrate excellence. We are here to celebrate the future." My heart hammered against my ribs. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was saving the best for last. Maybe he would acknowledge that his daughter saved a teenager from an overdose last week during clinicals. Maybe he would say he was proud of me for choosing a path of service. He turned slightly, but his eyes glided right past me. They landed on Savannah. "We have built a legacy at Holloway and Crane," he continued, smiling at my sister, "and nothing makes a father prouder than knowing that legacy is in safe hands. Savannah, darling, stand up." Savannah stood, looking appropriately bashful. The room applauded. My mother beamed, her eyes shining with genuine tears of joy. "You are about to embark on a journey that will define your life," my father said, raising his glass higher. "You are going to a school that shapes presidents and Supreme Court justices. You are the future of this family." He paused for dramatic effect. The room waited. "I know we are technically here because Leah finished her program," he said, his tone shifting. It was subtle, but I heard it, the drop in enthusiasm. The slight dismissal. He waved a hand vaguely in the direction of the kitchen doors, not even looking at me. "But let us be honest with ourselves tonight. Savannah is the only child worth celebrating this evening. Leah has chosen a path that is different, but Savannah is the one who will carry our name into the history books. To Savannah, the room echoed. My mother nodded, smiling that tight, polite smile, as if what he had just said was the most natural thing in the world, as if he had not just erased me from my own life. I sat there, frozen. The champagne in the glasses at my table rippled from the applause. A paralegal next to me glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away, pretending to be fascinated by the tablecloth. They heard it. Everyone heard it. He had not just praised Savannah. He had publicly declared that I was a waste of potential. He had announced that saving lives was less important than arguing over contracts. My blood ran cold, then hot. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap across the face, stinging and sharp. I looked at Savannah. She was laughing, clinking glasses with the man next to her. She did not look at me. She did not look uncomfortable. She looked like she agreed. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the celebratory noise. But no one turned around. I grabbed my clutch. I did not run. I did not storm out. I walked. I walked past the tables of people who did not know my name. I walked past the banner that celebrated a legacy I was excluded from. I walked past my father, who was now deep in conversation with a judge, his back turned to me. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air of Charlotte. The valet looked at me, surprised to see someone leaving so early. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean, free of vanilla and hypocrisy. I looked back at the glowing windows of the Marigold Terrace. Inside, they were toasting to the Martin name. They were celebrating the lawyer, the prestige, the money. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought I would go home, cry into my pillow, and wake up tomorrow grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. They were wrong. I did not cry. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. The way it always was when I arrived at a scene and saw the chaos. I knew what to do with trauma. I knew how to triage, and I knew that some limbs were too damaged to be saved. They had to be amputated to save the body. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I had a decision to make. Tonight was supposed to be the end of my education, but it turned out to be the beginning of my education in something else entirely. That night, they thought I was running away. Actually, I was just opening the door for something they could not control. To understand why I walked out of that ballroom, you have to understand the dinner table I grew up at, in the Martin household. Sunday dinner was not a meal. It was a cross-examination. My father liked to say that we were 3 generations of sharks in bespoke suits. The Martin name was etched onto brass plaques in downtown Charlotte, whispered in courtrooms, with a mix of fear and reverence, and printed on letterheads that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Every conversation we ever had revolved around reputation. Who was clerking for which judge? Who had secured the corner office? Who had been invited to the gala? I was the glitch in their perfectly curated matrix. I did not choose emergency medicine because I wanted to rebel. I chose it because when I was 16, I watched my uncle collapse at a 4th of July barbecue. While my father shouted for someone to call a lawyer, habit, I suppose, and my mother worried about the guests seeing a medical emergency, I watched a young woman in a uniform kneel in the dirt. She was calm. She was precise. She moved with a quiet authority that silenced the panic. She saved his life before the ambulance even started its engine. I realized then that I did not want to be the person who argued about the aftermath of a tragedy. I wanted to be the person standing on the line between life and death, holding the door shut against the darkness. My parents saw it differently. When I told them I was enrolling in a paramedic program, my father looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses and asked if I was serious about becoming a glorified taxi driver. He called it medical manual labor. He said it was work for people who used their backs because they could not use their minds. My mother was more subtle, but her disappointment cut deeper. She told me that emergency services were not exactly conversation starters at the country club. She asked me how she was supposed to explain to her friends that her daughter spent her nights washing blood off her boots instead of drafting mergers and acquisitions. It was not classy. It did not fit the aesthetic of the Martin brand. So, the divide began. Savannah was the golden child, the vessel for all their unfulfilled ambitions and vanity. She was 4 years younger than me, but she eclipsed me in every room she entered because my parents held the spotlight for her. When Savannah wanted to go to a pre-law summer camp in Georgetown, my father wrote a check without blinking. When she needed an internship to pad her resume, a single phone call from my father secured her a spot at the district attorney's office. She got the tutors, the fully funded study abroad trips to Europe, and the brand new car on her 16th birthday because she needed reliable transport to her prestigious extracurriculars. I got a pamphlet on student loans. I moved out at 19 because I could not breathe in that house anymore. I worked night shifts as an EMT while studying for my paramedic certification. I learned to sleep in 4-hour bursts. I learned how to eat vending machine dinners while studying pharmacology flashcards. I took out loans that kept me awake at night. Calculating interest rates in my head, when I did come home for holidays, I was usually exhausted, smelling of antiseptic and coffee. My mother would look at the dark circles under my eyes and suggest a new concealer. My father would ask if I was done with my phase yet. The comparisons were never direct. They were always implied. If I mentioned that I had passed a difficult cardiology exam with a perfect score, my mother would smile vaguely and ask if Savannah had heard back from Yale yet. If I told them I had successfully intubated a patient in a chaotic scene, my father would nod and check his watch, then pivot the conversation to Savannah's LSAT scores. It was a constant, low-level hum of rejection. It was not that they hated me. It was worse. They were indifferent to me, to them. My achievements were invisible because they were happening in a world they did not value. But I was not entirely alone. I had Nora. Nora Bennett was my mother's mother. But you would never guess they shared DNA. My mother was silk and pearls. Nora was denim and iron. My grandmother had been an EMS coordinator for 35 years. She had run the dispatch centers when the systems were still paper and radio. She was a legend in the local emergency response community, a woman who had trained half the veteran paramedics in the county. But in the Martin house, Nora was treated like a slightly embarrassing relative. They tolerated her because she was family, but they looked down on her because she had never passed the bar exam. They saw her career as blue-collar service work. Nora was the only one who tracked my schedule. She was the one who texted me at 3 a.m. to ask how my shift was going. She knew the names of my instructors. She knew the difference between basic life support and advanced cardiac life support. Every time I passed a certification, there was a card in my mailbox from Nora, usually with a $50 bill and a note that said, "Keep saving the world, kid." One afternoon, about 6 months before graduation, I was sitting on Nora's porch, crying. I had just finished a double shift where we lost a teenager to a drunk driver, and I was emotionally bankrupt. I told her I did not think I could do it anymore. I told her that no matter how hard I worked, I felt like a failure because I was not Savannah. Nora put her coffee cup down and looked at me with eyes that had seen more trauma than my father could ever imagine. She told me that I did not lack ability. She said I lacked visibility. She told me that my parents were looking at the world through a keyhole shaped like a gavel, and they could not see the sky. She told me that one day, I would make them look. I did not understand what she meant then. I just thought she was being a supportive grandmother. Then came the email regarding the graduation party. It arrived 2 weeks before the ceremony. It was from my mother. But the tone was purely transactional. The subject line was simply, "Logistics for the 17th. There was no excitement. There were no exclamation marks. It read like a memo sent to a contractor. It listed the time, the location at Marigold Terrace, and the dress code. It explicitly stated that I should arrive by 6 o'clock sharp for photos. But then I read the guest list attached to the bottom of the thread. I scanned the names: Judge Thompson, the partners from the firm, Savannah's sorority sisters, my mother's tennis group. I looked for my best friend, Sarah. I looked for my training officer, Mike. I looked for anyone who had actually been part of my journey for the last 2 years. They were not there, I replied, asking if I could invite a few friends from my cohort. My mother replied 3 hours later. She said that the venue had a strict capacity limit and that these were people who could help the family network. She said that my friends might feel out of place among such established professionals. She said, "Let us just keep it family and close friends." Close friends. That was the phrase that made my stomach turn. These were not my friends. They were business assets. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the screen. That was the moment the crack in the foundation finally split open. I realized this was not a party for me. It was a networking event for my father and a launch party for Savannah. I was just the excuse they needed to rent the room. The realization was cold and heavy, like a stone settling in my chest. But instead of canceling, instead of fighting, I remembered Nora's words, "If they could not see me." Maybe it was time I forced them to open their eyes. I replied to the email with one word: understood. I had no idea that while I was reading that email, Nora was making phone calls that would dismantle their entire narrative. I just knew that when I walked into Marigold Terrace, I would be walking into a lion's den. I just didn't know yet that I was the one bringing the whip. The email from my mother was a masterclass in logistical coldness. It did not start with congratulations or "we are so proud." It started with a bulleted list of instructions regarding the schedule. Arrival time was 1700 hours sharp for professional photography. The dress code was specified as cocktail formal, preferably neutrals or navy to match the floral arrangements. There was a note about the valet parking being prepaid, so I should not worry about tipping. It was efficient. It was precise. It was the kind of memo you send to a subordinate before a corporate retreat. I read it 3 times, searching for a single sentence that asked if I was happy or if there was anything I wanted for my own celebration. There was nothing. Then I opened the attachment labeled guest_list_final ... XLSX. It was a spreadsheet organized by table numbers. I scrolled through the names, and with every row, the knot in my stomach tightened. Table 1, Judge Holloway and his wife. Table 2, the senior partners from the firm. Table 3, important clients from the banking sector. Table 4, Savannah's friends from her prep school and her new law school cohort. I saw the names of people who had spent the last decade ignoring me at Christmas parties. I saw the names of people who had probably never set foot in an ambulance unless it was to sue the hospital. I kept scrolling, looking for my world. I looked for Sarah, my partner who had held a flashlight for me in a wrecked car while I started an IV line. I looked for Captain Miller, my training officer who wrote my recommendation letter. I looked for my instructors. They were not there, not a single one. I picked up the phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice sounding distracted, likely in the middle of a fitting or a salon appointment. "Mom, I'm looking at the list," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I don't see any of my friends. I wanted to invite Sarah and Mike. and maybe a few people from my class. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh that sounded like tearing silk. Leah, honey, we have been over this. The venue has a cap of 60 people. We are already squeezing in the wife of your father's new managing partner. So there is room for a stranger, but not for the people I actually study with, I asked. It is not about room, Leah, she said, her tone shifting to that condescending register she used when explaining table manners. It is about the atmosphere. This is a formal sit-down dinner with a 7-course tasting menu. Your friends well. They are lovely people, I am sure, but they might not feel comfortable in that setting. We want everyone to be at ease. It is better this way. Better for who? I asked. But she had already moved on to asking if I had found shoes that matched the navy dress requirement. 2 days later, the physical invitation arrived in my mailbox. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely insulting. Centered on the front, in swirling calligraphy, were the words, "Celebrating the Martin family." I stared at it. My name was not even on the cover. Inside, in smaller print at the bottom, it said, "In honor of the graduation of Leah Martin and the acceptance of Savannah Martin." I was the footnote in my own headline. I was the excuse they were using to throw a party for themselves. It was not a celebration of my degree. It was a networking mixer for the Martin legal dynasty. And I was just the prop they needed to rent the ballroom. I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. I could not do this over the phone anymore. I needed to look my father in the eye. When I arrived, the house was quiet. I found my father in his study, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of expensive scotch. He was reviewing a case file, highlighting text with a yellow marker. He did not look up when I entered. "Dad, we need to talk about the party," I said, standing in front of his massive oak desk. "I am busy, Leah," he said, turning a page. "Your mother is handling the social calendar." "This isn't social. It is personal," I said. "I want to know why my graduation party looks like a board meeting for your firm. Why are none of my people invited? Why does the banner say Martin Legacy instead of my name?" He finally looked up. His eyes were cold, assessing me like I was a hostile witness. He took off his reading glasses and set them down on the leather blotter. "Because, Leah," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "this event is about the family standing. It is about maintaining our position in this community. When people look at the Martins, they expect a certain caliber of company. They expect success. They expect the law." "I am successful," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I finished top of my class. I am a licensed paramedic. That is real work." "It is blue-collar work," he snapped, cutting me off. "It is noble, fine, but do not pretend it carries the same weight as what we do. And do not ask me to fill a room with people who drive ambulances so they can drink $300 champagne and talk about trauma. It does not fit." "So I don't fit," I said. "That is what you are saying." He leaned back in his chair. "Leah, do not make this difficult. We are throwing you a very expensive party. You should be grateful. Just show up, smile, and do not remind everyone that this house has one child who decided to go off standard. We are trying to help you look respectable." "Respectable?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You mean you are trying to hide me?" My mother walked in then. Hearing the raised voices, she immediately went to my father's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Leah, stop it," she hissed. "Why do you always have to cause conflict? You are being so sensitive. We are doing this for you." "You are doing this for Savannah," I said. "Admit it, this is her pre-party for law school." "Savannah has a bright future," my mother said defensively. "We are celebrating both of you. Why can't you just be happy for your sister? Why does everything have to be a competition with you?" I looked past them. Towards the open door of the study, Savannah was standing in the hallway. She was wearing her tennis whites, holding a bottle of water. She had heard everything. She heard Dad call me off standard. She heard Mom call me sensitive. Our eyes locked. For a second. I thought she might say something. I thought she might step into the room and say, "Actually, Leah is right. It is her graduation." But she didn't. She just looked at me with a blank expression, then looked down at her phone and walked away towards the kitchen. She wasn't malicious, but her silence was a weapon. She benefited from my erasure, so she let it happen. I looked back at my parents. They were united, a wall of polished granite that I had been banging my head against for 24 years. "Fine," I said. The anger in my chest cooled down into something hard and solid. "I will be there. I will wear the navy dress. I will smile." "Good," my father said, picking up his pen again. "Close the door on your way out." I left the study. I walked out of the house that had never really been a home. I did not slam the door. I did not cry in the car. I realized that begging them to see me was a waste of energy. They had made it clear. I was a guest in their world, and a second-class one at that. If they wanted a show, I would give them one. But as I drove away, I decided that I was done playing by their script. I was done trying to get invited to the table. It was time to flip the table over. I drove straight from my parents' house to the one place in Charlotte where I did not have to hold my breath. My grandmother Nora lived in a small, weathered bungalow on the east side of the city, a neighborhood my father referred to as transitional, and my mother avoided entirely. The porch light was on, a steady yellow beacon in the early evening gloom. I parked my car, walked up the steps, and before I could even knock, the door swung open. Nora stood there in her oversized cardigan and slippers, holding 2 mugs of tea. She did not ask why I was there. She did not ask why my eyes were red or why my hands were shaking. She just handed me a mug and nodded toward the swing bench on the porch. "Tell me," she said, sitting down with a groan that spoke of 70 years of hard work. I told her everything. I told her about the banner that erased my name. I told her about the table assignment next to the swinging kitchen doors. I told her about the guest list filled with judges and clients, and the complete absence of anyone who actually knew who I was. I told her about my father calling me off-standard, and my mother telling me I was being sensitive for wanting to be acknowledged at my own party. Nora listened in silence. She stared out at the street, her expression unreadable. She blew on her tea, her hands steady. When I finished, the silence stretched out between us for a long moment. Then, she turned to me and asked a single, quiet question. "Did your father invite me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt my throat tighten. I had been so wrapped up in my own exclusion that I had not even processed the fact that her name was missing from the spreadsheet too. I looked down at my tea, unable to meet her gaze. "No," I whispered. "He said it was a networking event. He said he wanted to keep the guest list focused on professional peers." I expected her to be hurt. I expected her to look sad. Instead, a short, sharp laugh escaped her lips. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound of a woman who had just confirmed a suspicion she had held for decades. "Professional peers," she repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. That is Gordon's way of saying he does not want a retired dispatcher sitting next to his precious partners. He thinks I smell like diesel and cheap coffee. "Grandma, I'm sorry," I said, feeling a fresh wave of shame. "I won't go either. If you are not invited, I am not going." "Oh, no," Nora said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and authoritative. It was the voice she must have used when she was managing multi-casualty incidents over the radio. "You are going, and so am I. I do not need an invitation from Gordon Martin to be proud of my granddaughter. I do not need his permission to take up space." She set her mug down on the railing and turned to face me fully. The soft grandmother was gone. In her place was the woman who had run the county's emergency communications for 35 years. "You need to understand something about your father. Leah, he does not just look down on you because you aren't a lawyer. He looks down on us because he's afraid of what we do. Years ago, before you were born, He told me that emergency medicine was street work. He called us medical movers. He thinks that because we get our hands dirty, because we kneel on the pavement, we are less than him. He thinks prestige comes from a mahogany desk. He does not understand that prestige is keeping a heart beating when the world is trying to stop it. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded envelope. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a thick manila envelope with official stamps on it. "I have a secret, Leah," she said, handing it to me. "Your father thinks I am just an old woman who answers phones. He forgets that for 3 decades, I was the voice in the ear of every chief of medicine, every fire captain, and every hospital administrator in this state. I know people, and more importantly, people know me." I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen before. There were letters of recommendation, not from my professors, but from the actual medical directors of the hospitals where I had done my clinical rotations. There were detailed incident reports from my shifts, highlighted where I had performed critical interventions, and there was a letter from the State Board of EMS, commending a student named Leah Martin for exceptional performance in the field. "How did you get these?" I asked, my hands trembling. "I made calls," Nora said simply. "I knew your parents would never look at your charts. I knew they would never ask your training officers how you did. So I did. I reached out to my old contacts. I told them to watch you. I told them, 'That is my granddaughter. Treat her like anyone else, but tell me the truth about her.' And they did. These letters, these didn't go to your school. They went to the people who actually matter in this industry." She pointed a finger at the papers. "You are not just a good student. Leah, you are a natural. The reports say you have ice in your veins. They say you lead scenes that veteran medics would struggle with. Your family sees a girl who failed to be a lawyer. The state sees a provider who is going to change the standard of care." I stared at the papers, tears finally spilling over, for 2 years. I thought I was shouting into a void. I thought no one saw the extra hours, the blood on my uniform, the exhaustion, but Nora saw. She had been watching the whole time, quietly building a case for my defense, compiling the evidence of my worth. "Leah," she said, grabbing my chin and forcing me to look at her. "Listen to me. If they want to look at you like a shadow, we are going to show them that you are the rescue light. We are not going to that party to beg for their affection. We are going to that party to show them exactly what they threw away." "But how?" I asked. "Dad controls the room. He controls the microphone." "Let him have the microphone," Nora smiled. And it was a smile full of dangerous intent. "We have the truth, and I have one more card to play." She did not explain what she meant. Instead, she stood up and smoothed her cardigan. "Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we prepare. And bring that navy dress. We are going to make sure it is the last thing they ever overlook." I drove home feeling a shift in the atmosphere. The heavy, suffocating dread was gone, replaced by a buzzing energy. I was not alone. I had the best dispatcher in the state running logistics for me. As I walked into my apartment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from my mother reminding me to book a hair appointment. It was a voicemail from a number I did not recognize. The area code was local, but it wasn't a personal number. It looked like an office line. I tapped play, holding the phone to my ear as I kicked off my shoes. "Ms. Martin," a deep professional voice spoke. "My name is Dr. Malcolm Pierce. I am the Director of Emergency Services for the Crescent Bay Network. I have a file on my desk with your name on it, sent to me by a mutual acquaintance. I am looking at your clinical evaluations, and frankly, I need to speak with you immediately. I have some news regarding our residency program that I think you will want to hear. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. We have a situation that requires your specific skill set." I lowered the phone. Crescent Bay, that was the gold standard. That was the place everyone applied to and no one got into. I looked at the manila envelope Nora had given me. A mutual acquaintance. I wasn't just walking into that party with a grandmother. I was walking in with an army I didn't even know I commanded. The Martin legacy was about to meet the Bennett reality. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the phone before I could dial the number back. I took 3 deep breaths, pacing the small square footage of my living room, trying to channel the same icy calm I used when intubating a patient in a moving ambulance. I tapped the screen and waited. "Doctor." Malcolm Pierce answered on the first ring. His voice was not what I expected. It was not the smooth, polished baritone of the partners at my father's law firm who spoke in billable hours. It was gravelly, direct, and sounded like it belonged to a man who had seen everything the human body could endure and decided to keep fighting anyway. He did not waste time with small talk. He verified my identity and then dropped a bomb that rearranged my entire understanding of my future. He told me that the Crescent Bay Emergency Network was launching a new pilot program. It was a lead paramedic residency, designed to bridge the gap between field medicine and clinical administration. It was not just a job, it was a fast track to becoming a medical operations coordinator. He told me that out of 400 applicants from across the tri-state area, they were selecting 2. I was one of them. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, staring at a stack of unpaid utility bills. I asked him to repeat the offer because my brain refused to process the data. "Doctor," Pierce broke it down for me. The starting salary was $92,000 a year. I gasped. I physically gasped. I knew what the junior associates at Holloway and Crane made. I had heard my father complain about their salaries often enough. They started at $85,000, and for that, they sold their souls to the firm, working 80-hour weeks reviewing contracts in windowless basements. I was being offered more than them to save lives. He continued, "Full medical and dental benefits with 0 deductible, a signing bonus of $5,000, tuition reimbursement for any further specialization I wanted to pursue, including critical care flight paramedic certification. This was not blue-collar work. This was an elite career. This was financial independence. This was freedom. But then came the condition. Doctor." Pierce explained that Crescent Bay was trying to rebrand. They wanted to elevate the public perception of pre-hospital care. They were tired of their paramedics being seen as ambulance drivers. They wanted to make a statement. As part of this initiative, they were hand-delivering offers to their top recruits at significant life events. He asked me if I had a graduation ceremony coming up where he could formally present the offer letter and the residency patch. I looked at the coffee table. The cream-colored cardstock invitation was sitting there, mocking me, celebrating the Martin family. The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. My parents had designed an entire evening to showcase the family success, explicitly excluding my career because they thought it was beneath them. They had curated a guest list of 50 people to applaud Savannah's acceptance into law school, while assuming I would sit quietly in the corner. The embarrassed sibling with the dead-end job. A plan formed in my mind. It was not malicious. It was simply a correction of the record. I picked up the invitation and held it while I spoke to Dr. Pierce. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "there is a dinner. It is this Saturday, but I have to be honest with you. Dr. Pierce, it is complicated." He asked what I meant. I told him the truth. I told him it was a room full of corporate lawyers and high-net-worth clients. I told him that in that room, emergency medicine was viewed as a service trade. Somewhere between a janitor and a delivery driver, I told him that my father had explicitly asked me not to talk about my work because it might make the guests uncomfortable. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he was going to rescind the offer. I thought he would say that he did not want to walk into a hostile environment. Instead, I heard a low chuckle. It was a dark, amused sound. "Doctor." Pierce said that if that was the case, then it was even more critical that the right people showed up. He said he had spent 20 years dealing with trauma surgeons who thought they were gods, and a room full of lawyers did not scare him. He told me he would be there. He told me he would bring the offer, and then he added something else. He said he would bring a few colleagues along. He said that since my family was so concerned with the Martin legacy and public perception, he wanted to make sure they understood exactly what kind of legacy I was building. He promised me that by the time he left that room, no one would be looking at me with pity. We finalized the details. He asked for the time and address. I gave him the coordinates of Marigold Terrace. I told him to arrive at 1900 hours, right after the appetizers were cleared. Right when the speeches were scheduled to begin, I hung up the phone and felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the absence of fear. For the first time in my life, I held a card that my father could not trump. I did not call my parents. I did not text Savannah. I let them continue their preparations undisturbed. The next day, I went to my parents' house for a final dress check. My mother was frantic, worrying about the floral arrangements and the seating chart. She looked at me and asked if I had remembered to pick up my dress from the dry cleaners. She reminded me again to keep my conversations light. She told me to just nod and smile if anyone asked what I was doing now. I looked at her. She was so consumed by the appearance of success that she had completely missed the reality of it standing right in front of her. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. I told her not to worry. I told her I would be on my best behavior. I told her I understood exactly what my role was for the evening. She patted my cheek, relieved. She thought I had finally accepted my place as the supporting actor in Savannah's movie. She had no idea that the script had been rewritten 24 hours ago. I walked out of their house with the secret burning in my pocket like a flare. I drove past the Marigold Terrace on my way home, looking at the grand entrance where the valet stand would be. I imagined the banner inside. I imagined my father's speech. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect night to cement their status. They thought they were going to present Savannah as the only future of the Martin line. I was not going to ruin their party. I was not going to flip tables or throw wine. I was going to do something much more effective. I was going to let them have their stage. And then, when they least expected it, I was going to change who was holding the microphone. The morning of the party. I woke up with the kind of clarity that usually only comes after a double shot of espresso in a cold shower. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt precise. I sat at my small kitchen table with a folder of documents spread out before me. My father liked to talk about evidence, about building a case, about the importance of the paper trail. So, I had decided to speak his language. I had spent the previous night gathering every piece of paper that defined my worth, not as a daughter, but as a professional. First, I reviewed the catering contract for the Marigold Terrace. I had found it sitting on the counter at my parents' house the day before, buried under a stack of bridal magazines for Savannah. Even though she was not even engaged yet, I had taken a picture of it. It was a standard agreement for a private event, outlining the costs for the venue rental, the 7-course tasting menu, and the open bar. The deposit was $5,000. I looked at the payment source listed at the bottom. It was paid via check number 402 from the Martin Family Trust. I stared at the image on my phone, and a cold smile touched my lips. That trust was not just my father's money. When I turned 18, my father insisted I contribute 20% of my earnings from my part-time jobs into the family fund. He called it learning fiscal responsibility and contributing to the collective future. For 6 years, through college and paramedic school, every time I picked up an extra shift, every time I worked a holiday for time and a half pay, a portion of that money went into that account. I did the math in my head. The deposit for this party, a party where I was being sidelined, a party designed to erase my achievements, was paid for, at least in part, by the sweat off my own back. I had literally paid for the privilege of being ignored. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also liberating. It meant I had equity in this event. I was not crashing their party. I was simply attending a function I had helped finance. I did not call the venue to cancel. I did not call the bank to complain. I let the schedule stand. The disruption would be far more effective if everything appeared normal until the very last second. I picked up my phone and dialed Nora. "Plan is a go," I said when she answered. "I have my outfit laid out," Nora replied, her voice crisp. "I found a suit I used to wear to the state hearings. It still fits. I will see you there." "Meet me in the lobby at 1845, I told her. "The guests arrive at 1900. I want us to be inside and seated before the first bottle of champagne is popped. When Dr. Pierce arrives, I need you to be ready. He knows to look for you. And the signal? She asked. When Dad raises his glass for the main toast, I said. That is when we move. Not a second before. Understood, she said. Stand tall. Leah. I hung up and opened my messaging app. I created a group chat with Sarah and Mike, my two closest friends from the station. I hesitated for a moment, then typed out the message. Change of plans. Do not come inside the venue. The vibe is hostile. But I need backup. Can you guys park around the corner and hang out near the entrance around 19:30? Just in case I need an exit strategy or a witness. The replies came in immediately. Copy that. Mike wrote, We will be in the rig. If you need us to hit the sirens to drown out a speech, just say the word. I have your back. Sarah added, Nobody messes with our medic. I put the phone down. It felt good to have a team. My family had a network of associates. I had a brotherhood of first responders. I knew which one I would trust in a crisis. I went back to the folder. I organized the documents Dr. Pierce had mentioned, along with the copies Nora had given me. The letter from the state board, the clinical evaluations, my transcript showing a 4.0 GPA, and finally, the email from Crescent Bay, printed out on crisp white paper. I placed them all in a sleek, black leather portfolio. It looked like something a lawyer would carry. It was perfect. Then, I did something just for me. I logged onto a local florist's website. I found a simple arrangement: white lilies and blue hydrangeas, clean and professional. I ordered a small bouquet to be delivered to table 12. Seat B. That was my seat, the dark corner near the kitchen. I wrote the note for the card. To Leah, for the lives you saved and the ones you will save. Congratulations. It was a small gesture, maybe a little sad to an outsider, but to me, it was necessary. If they were not going to buy me flowers, I would buy them myself. I was done waiting for someone else to validate my existence. Just as I was zipping up the portfolio, my phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen and saw Savannah's name. My thumb hovered over the notification. Savannah rarely texted me unless she needed something, a ride, money, or advice on how to handle a hangover. Hey, the text read, Mom is freaking out about the color coordination. Are you definitely wearing the navy dress? Also, what heels? I am wearing the gold Louboutins Dad got me. So maybe don't wear anything too high? I don't want to look short in the photos. I read the message twice. There was no, how are you? There was no, are you excited for tonight? There was just anxiety about aesthetics and a request for me to physically minimize myself so she could look taller. For a long time. I had thought Savannah was malicious. I thought she actively plotted against me. But reading that text, I realized the truth was more pathetic. She was not evil. She was just conditioned. She had been raised in a house of mirrors where her reflection was the only one that mattered. She did not try to hurt me. She simply did not realize I was a person with feelings. To her, I was just another accessory to be coordinated. Like a handbag or a pair of earrings, I could have been angry. I could have typed back a nasty response telling her to grow up. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity. She was entering a shark tank of a profession, armed only with vanity and her father's connections. I was entering a field where I had to earn my respect every single day with my own 2 hands. Navy dress, nude pumps, 3 inches. I typed back, see you there. Thanks, she replied instantly with a heart emoji. Love you. The words, love you, looked hollow on the screen. It was the automatic sign-off of a girl who had never had to work for affection. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself. I was not the tired student anymore. I was not the rejected daughter. I was a lead paramedic resident for the Crescent Bay Emergency Network. I had saved lives. I had held death at bay. I had a grandmother who moved mountains for me and a boss who was willing to crash a high society party to hire me. I began to recite the words I had prepared for the evening. I did not write them down. I wanted them to come from the heart, but I needed to keep them disciplined. No screaming, no crying, no accusations, just facts. My name is Leah Martin. I am a paramedic. Tonight, you are celebrating a legacy of law. but I am here to celebrate a legacy of life. It was short. It was simple, and it was going to shatter the glass ceiling they had built over my head. I checked the time. It was 1600 hours, 3 hours until 0 hour. I took a shower. Scrubbing away the doubt, I did my hair in a sleek, professional bun. I applied makeup. Not to hide, but to accentuate the determination in my eyes. I stepped into the navy dress. It fit perfectly. It was modest, authoritative, and practical. I picked up the black leather portfolio. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a bouquet of flowers, heavier than a diploma. It carried the weight of my future. I walked out to my car. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. I unlocked the door and paused, looking back at my apartment building. When I came back here tonight, everything would be different. The bridge to my family might be burned, but the road ahead would be paved with my own asphalt. I was not going to that party to beg for love. I was going there to announce that I no longer needed it to survive. I started the engine. The radio played a soft tune, but I turned it off. I needed silence. I needed focus. I was ready to open the door. The chandeliers at Marigold Terrace were not designed to provide light. They were designed to intimidate. They hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen explosions of crystal, refracting the golden glow of the sconces into 1,000 piercing beams. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and the crisp, starchy scent of fresh linen. It was 1900 hours on the dot when I walked through the double mahogany doors. I paused at the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the brilliance. The room was already buzzing with the low, polite hum of 50 wealthy people making conversation. Men in Italian wool suits stood in clusters, holding whiskey tumblers and laughing at jokes that probably involved tax loopholes. Women in silk and chiffon glided between the tables, their jewelry catching the light with every turn of their heads. I spotted my father near the center of the room. He was holding court, shaking the hand of a man I recognized as a state senator. My father's smile was wide, his posture expansive. He looked like a king surveying his dominion. I walked toward him, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I expected a greeting. I expected a hug. After all, this was ostensibly my party too. When he saw me, his smile did not waver, but his eyes went flat. He disengaged from the senator for a brief second, looked at me, and gave a sharp, downward nod. It was the same nod he gave to the valet who parked his Jaguar or the waiter who refilled his water. It was an acknowledgement of presence, not an expression of affection. "You are on time," he said, his voice low so the senator wouldn't hear. "Good. Find your seat. We are starting in 15 minutes. He turned his back on me before I could say a word, seamlessly pivoting back to his conversation about zoning laws. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked for my mother. She was over by the head table, fussing over Savannah. My sister was standing on a small riser, looking like a pageant queen in her champagne gown. My mother was on her knees, adjusting the hem of the dress, smoothing out invisible wrinkles. "Stand up straight, darling," I heard my mother say, her voice carrying across the short distance. "The photographer is going to be here any second. We want to make sure the light hits the neckline perfectly." I looked down at my own dress. The navy blue fabric was high quality, professional, and paid for with money I had earned working overtime shifts on Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. No one had helped me pick it out. No one was smoothing my hem. I was standing alone in the middle of a crowd, feeling less like a guest of honor and more like a crasher. I turned away and began the long walk to my table. I did not need a map to find it. I just followed the social hierarchy of the room. I walked past the head table, where the crystal goblets were already filled. I walked past the tables reserved for the partners and the clients. I kept walking until the carpet changed from plush wool to a thinner, high-traffic variety near the back service entrance. Table 12 was small, round, and shoved into the corner, directly beneath the thermostat. The swinging door to the kitchen was 3 feet away. Every time a server rushed out with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, a draft of hot, garlic-scented air hit the back of my neck. I found my name card. Leah Martin. It was printed in a simpler font than the ones at the head table. Next to it was the small bouquet I had ordered for myself. The white lilies looked brave against the stark white tablecloth. I touched a petal, grounding myself. I am here. I thought, I earned this. I sat down, keeping my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. From this vantage point, I could see the entire room, and I could see the banner. It was suspended above the small stage where the microphone stood. It was massive, spanning at least 12 feet. The gold lettering was impeccable, celebrating the Martin family, and below it, in smaller text, a legacy of excellence. It was a beautiful piece of propaganda. It erased my struggle, erased my individuality, and subsumed everything into the collective brand of my father's ego. I felt a flash of anger so hot, it made my vision blur. But I forced it down. I checked my watch. 19:15 hours. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the main entrance swung open with force. The room quieted slightly. People turned to look, expecting perhaps a late VIP guest or another tray of champagne. It was Nora. She was not wearing the soft cardigans she usually wore at home. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been tailored in a different era. Sharp and severe. Her white hair was pulled back into a tight chignon. She did not look like a grandmother. She looked like the woman who had managed crisis communications for an entire county for 3 decades. She looked like a general inspecting the front lines. She did not wait for a host to greet her. She walked straight into the room, her cane tapping a rhythmic, authoritative beat on the floor. She did not look at the guests. She looked straight ahead, her eyes locked on the head table. My father saw her. His smile faltered. He excused himself from the senator and walked quickly to intercept her, trying to cut her off before she reached the center of the room. "Nora," he said, his voice tight, trying to keep the volume down but failing to mask the irritation. "What are you doing here?" Nora stopped. She stood barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. "I am attending my granddaughter's graduation party. Gordon," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a projection quality that carried, "Unless I have the wrong date?" "You know you do not," my father hissed, stepping closer to her, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "We discussed this. The guest list was closed. This is a formal business function. You were not invited." The room went silent. The hum of conversation died instantly. 50 pairs of eyes shifted from their drinks to the drama unfolding near the entrance. Nora did not back down. She did not flinch. She looked up at him, her expression one of cool amusement. "I did not realize I needed an invitation to be proud of my own flesh and blood," she said, her voice ringing out clearly in the silence. "And frankly, Gordon, if you think a piece of paper is going to stop me from watching Leah cross a finish line, you have forgotten who taught you how to argue." She sidestepped him. It was a graceful, dismissive movement. She walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture and headed straight for the back of the room. Straight for me. My father stood there, red-faced, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked around the room, seeing the curious stares of his clients and partners. He forced a stiff smile, smoothed his jacket, and signaled for the waiters to refill glasses, trying to pretend that he had not just been publicly defied by an 80-year-old woman. I stood up as Nora approached. My heart was hammering against my ribs. She reached my table and looked at me. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and full of love. "Grandma," I breathed. "Sit down," she said, pulling out the chair next to me. The paralegal who had been sitting there quickly grabbed his drink and moved to another table without a word. Nora took his seat. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was iron. "Did you bring the portfolio?" she whispered. I nodded, glancing at the black leather case resting against the leg of my chair. "It is right here." "Good," she said. She looked toward the front of the room, where my father was now moving toward the stage. "He is going to start. He is going to try to bury you with words. Let him dig the hole. I squeezed her hand. I am scared, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Good, she said. Fear keeps you sharp. Just remember, you are not the one on trial tonight. He is. At the front of the room, the music faded. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing a spotlight on the podium. My father stepped up to the microphone. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against his crystal champagne flute. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was sharp and piercing. It cut through the last murmurs of conversation. The room fell into a respectful, anticipatory silence. My father beamed. He looked powerful. He looked in control. He looked like a man who believed he owned every narrative in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming, "if I could have your attention." I looked at Nora. She gave me a single, imperceptible nod. The blade was about to fall, and I was ready to catch it. My father stood at the podium, gripping the sides of the wooden lectern as if he were bracing himself to deliver a closing argument in a capital murder case. The spotlight caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked out at the sea of faces, 50 of his closest business associates, clients, and partners, and smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that did not reach his eyes. "Tonight," he began, his voice booming through the speakers, "we are here to celebrate family. We are here to celebrate the enduring strength of the Martin name, a name that has stood for excellence in this city for 3 generations." I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped in my lap. I waited for my name. I waited for him to acknowledge that the reason we were all eating Chilean sea bass on a Saturday night was that his eldest daughter had just completed a grueling medical certification. "When I look at the future of this family," he continued, pivoting his body slightly to the right, away from my dark corner and toward the head table, "I see promise, I see ambition, I see a young woman who understands that success is not just about doing a job, but about leading a community." He raised his glass toward Savannah. "Savannah," he said, his voice dropping to a register of reverence, "my shining star, you have just been accepted into one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. You are following in the footsteps of giants. You are the embodiment of everything your mother and I have worked for." The room applauded politely. Savannah lowered her eyes, performing humility with the skill of a seasoned actress. My mother reached over and squeezed Savannah's hand, beaming with a pride so intense it illuminated the entire front of the room. My father waited for the applause to die down. Then, he turned back to the crowd. He took a sip of his champagne, and for a split second, his eyes flickered toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen doors, toward me. "We are technically here to mark a graduation," he said, the warmth drained from his voice instantly. "But let us be honest with one another. A degree is just a piece of paper if it does not lead to a destination of consequence." He paused. The silence in the room shifted from respectful to uncomfortable. A few guests shifted in their seats. The senator looked down at his plate. "I look at Savannah," my father said, gesturing to my sister again, "and I see the next senior partner of Holloway and Crane. I look at her potential, and I cannot help but feel a certain regret." He took a breath, and then he drove the knife in. "I wish," he said, clearly and deliberately, "that Savannah was the one holding the degree tonight, because then we would be celebrating a qualification that is actually worthy of the Martin legacy." The air left the room. It was not just an insult, it was an evisceration. He had not just minimized my achievement, he had publicly stated that I was unworthy of the paper my name was printed on. He had told 50 people that he wished I was my sister. A woman at table 4 dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. My mother did not flinch. She kept that frozen, plaster smile on her face, nodding slightly as if my father had just made a profound philosophical point about meritocracy. She was trying to spin it. She was trying to frame his cruelty as high standards. I felt a cold numbness spread through my limbs. It was the same detachment I felt at a crash scene. Assess the damage. Secure the airway. Do not panic. I did not cry. I did not run. I slowly turned my head and looked at Nora. My grandmother was staring at my father with a look of absolute, terrifying clarity. She placed her hands on the table and pushed herself up. Her chair scraped against the marble floor, a harsh, grinding sound that tore through the silence. "Gordon," Nora said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a siren. My father looked irritated. "Nora, please, I am in the middle of a toast." "You are not toasting," Nora said. Stepping away from the table, she stood straight, her small frame radiating a power that made the legal partners in the room sit up straighter. "You are bullying." "Sit down, Mother," my mother hissed from the head table, her smile finally cracking. "You are making a scene." "I am making a correction," Nora said, her voice rising, steady and sharp. "You just congratulated the wrong child, at the wrong occasion, with the absolute wrong standing to do so." My father gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles turning white. "This is my house, Nora. This is a family matter. Do not presume to lecture me on my own event. You made it a public matter the moment you decided to humiliate that girl in front of 50 strangers," Nora shot back. She pointed a shaking finger at him. "You think because you paid for the wine, you bought the right to treat her like a servant? You think because she does not wear a suit, she does not matter? She drives an ambulance." "Nora!" my father shouted. Losing his composure, the mask of the polished lawyer slipped, revealing the petty, insecure man beneath. "She is a glorified taxi driver, and I will not stand here and pretend that is equal to what Savannah is achieving." The room was frozen. The guests were horrified, but they were paralyzed by the social awkwardness of witnessing a family implode. And then, the double doors at the entrance of the restaurant burst open. It was not a server. It was not a guest. A group of 4 people walked in. They moved with a synchronized, purposeful energy that demanded immediate attention. They were dressed in crisp, navy blue tactical polos with gold embroidery on the chest and gray tactical pants. They wore radio clips on their belts and identification badges on lanyards. They did not look like they were there for the champagne. They looked like they were there to take control of a scene. Leading the phalanx was a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore a navy blazer over his uniform, and his presence was electric. It was Dr. Malcolm Pierce. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at the waiters. He did not even look at my father, who was standing at the podium with his mouth slightly open, confused by the intrusion. "Doctor?" Pierce walked straight down the center aisle. His team flanked him, moving with military precision. The sound of their heavy boots on the marble floor was a stark contrast to the delicate clicking of dress shoes. My father sputtered into the microphone. "Excuse me? Who are you? This is a private event." "Doctor." Pierce ignored him completely. He kept walking until he reached table 12. He stopped directly in front of me. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Every eye was glued to the man who had just invaded the Martin sanctuary. "Doctor?" Pierce looked down at me. His expression was serious, respectful, and intensely focused. He nodded to Nora, acknowledging her presence with a deference that shocked the room. Then he turned back to me. "Ms. Martin," he said. His voice was deep, authoritative, and carried to every corner of the ballroom without the need for a microphone. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. "Dr. Pierce." My father stepped down from the stage, his face red with indignation. "Now see here. You cannot just barge in here. I am Gordon Martin, senior partner at Holloway & Crane, and I will have you removed for trespassing." "Doctor." Pierce finally turned. He looked at my father with the kind of calm disdain a surgeon reserves for a hysterical bystander. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Martin." "Doctor," Pierce said, "and I know exactly what you think this evening is about." He turned back to the room, raising his voice so that the senator, the partners, and the clients could hear every syllable. "My name is Dr. Malcolm Pierce. I am the Director of Emergency Services for the Crescent Bay Network. I oversee the largest trauma system in the state." He paused, letting the title sink in. Crescent Bay was a name that commanded respect even in legal circles. It was a massive institution. "I apologize for the interruption, Doctor," Pierce continued, his eyes locking onto my father's. "But I was informed that there was a celebration tonight for a graduate of exceptional talent. And when I heard that her own family was struggling to find the words to honor her properly, I decided to come and do it myself." My mother gasped. Savannah looked from me to Dr. Pierce, her eyes wide. "Doctor," Pierce reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a thick velvet presentation box. He held it up. "I did not come here to toast, Doctor," Pierce announced, his voice ringing with finality. "I came here to deliver something that Leah Martin has earned, something she deserves to receive right now, tonight, in front of every single one of you." He looked at me, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a smile of genuine camaraderie. "Shall we show them what a real legacy looks like, Leah?" he asked. "Doctor?" Pierce did not shout. He did not need to. He stood in the center of the ballroom with the kind of gravitational pull that usually belongs to celestial bodies or very expensive trial lawyers. He opened the leather portfolio he was carrying, not the velvet box yet, but a crisp file folder. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room, making eye contact with the senator, then the senior partners, and finally resting his gaze on my father. "I have the employment records for Ms. Leah Martin here." "Doctor," Pierce said, his voice level and precise. "In a cohort of 200 candidates, she ranked number 1 in clinical decision-making, she ranked number 1 in trauma management, and she holds the highest patient satisfaction rating we have seen in a resident applicant in 5 years. He pulled out a sheet of paper. "I am here to formally offer Leah the position of lead paramedic resident at Crescent Bay. This comes with a starting salary of $92,000, full benefits, and a guaranteed track to the medical operations coordinator role within 24 months. A murmur rippled through the room. I saw the head of the litigation department lean in and whisper something to his wife. They knew numbers. They knew that $92,000 for a 24-year-old was not taxi driver money. It was a serious career. "Furthermore, Doctor," Pierce continued, ignoring the whispers, "this offer includes a full tuition grant for her critical care certification. We are investing in her because people with her instinct for saving lives are rare. They are not off-standard, Mr. Martin. They are the standard." My father stood frozen near the stage. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man whose entire reality was glitching. He had spent years building a narrative that I was a failure, a charity case, a disappointment, and in under 2 minutes, a stranger had walked in and dismantled that lie with cold, hard data. "Doctor," Pierce wasn't done. He turned to me and handed me the folder. Then he looked back at my father and delivered the line that silenced the room completely. "Saving a human life on the pavement is no less prestigious than signing a contract at a mahogany desk. Gordon, in fact, most people would argue it is worth quite a bit more." The silence that followed was heavy. It was broken by a voice from table 2. It was Mr. Sterling, one of my father's oldest partners. "Gordon," Mr. Sterling said, looking genuinely confused. "You told us Leah was struggling to find her footing. Why on earth did you hide this? This is incredible." My father turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He stammered, trying to find the legal language to spin his way out of it. "Well, we simply wanted to keep the focus on Savannah tonight, as she is just starting her journey. It sounds like Leah is already miles ahead on hers," Mr. Sterling replied, raising his glass toward me. "Congratulations, young lady." And then it happened. One person started clapping. Then another. Then the senator. Suddenly, the room was filled with applause. It wasn't the polite, golf clap applause they had given Savannah. This was real. They were looking at me, not as Gordon Martin's disappointment, but as a woman who had just been headhunted by the biggest medical network in the state. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I looked at Nora. She was smiling. a fierce, victorious smile. She raised her imaginary glass to me. "Doctor." Pierce held up a hand to quiet the room. "One last thing," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a smaller envelope. "This came across my desk this morning because of her performance during her final rotation. Leah has been nominated for the National Emergency Leadership Fellowship. Only 12 people in the country get this nomination annually." He handed me the letter. "The Martin legacy seems to be doing just fine. Gordon, you just were not looking at the right daughter." He nodded to me, squeezed my shoulder, and then signaled his team. They turned and marched out as efficiently as they had arrived, leaving the room in a state of shock and awe. The rest of the dinner was a blur. People came up to my table, my exile table in the corner, to shake my hand. They asked about the fellowship. They asked about Crescent Bay. For the first time in my life, I was not invisible. I was the most interesting person in the room. I looked over at Savannah. She was sitting alone at the head table now. My parents were busy doing damage control with the partners. Savannah was watching me. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It looked like confusion, as if she was seeing me for the first time without the filter of our parents' prejudice. When the dessert was served, my mother finally made her move. She intercepted me as I was heading to the restroom. She grabbed my arm, her grip painful. Her face was a mask of panic. "Leah," she hissed, pulling me into a small alcove near the coat check. "You have made your point. Now you need to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked, pulling my arm away. "I didn't break anything. I just accepted a job." "You humiliated your father," she said, her voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling is asking questions." The senator looks confused. "You need to go back in there and tell them that your father helped you get this position. Tell them he supported you. Do not let them think we are a divided house." I looked at her, truly looked at her. "I won't do that, Mom. I won't lie for his ego anymore." "It is not about ego," she snapped. "It is about the family reputation. If people think we are unstable, it affects the firm. It affects Savannah's future." "Savannah's future is not my responsibility," I said coldly. I walked away from her. I felt lighter than air. I had won. I had stood up. I had been validated, and I had exposed their pettiness without screaming a single word. I was heading toward the exit, ready to leave, ready to celebrate with Nora and my friends who were waiting outside in the ambulance. "Leah." I turned. It was Savannah. She looked small in her expensive gown. She was holding her clutch bag tight against her chest. She looked around to make sure our parents were not watching. "That was intense," she said. "It was the truth," I replied. "I know," Savannah said softly. She looked down at her shoes. "Dad is furious. He is telling everyone inside that he pulled strings to get Dr. Pierce here. He is trying to take credit for it." "Let him," I said. "Dr. Pierce knows the truth. I know the truth." Savannah stepped closer. She looked terrified. "Leah, there is something else. When you mentioned the money, the salary—" "What about it?" "Dad was talking on the phone yesterday. With the bank," she whispered. "I heard him mention your name. I didn't think much of it until tonight, when you talked about being independent." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a photo she had printed out, or maybe a photocopy. "I took a picture of this off his desk this morning," she said, handing it to me. "I thought he was just helping you, but after what he said tonight about you not being worthy, I took the paper. It was a photocopy of a loan document, a guarantor agreement, for a luxury apartment lease in downtown Georgetown, near the law school Savannah would be attending. The rent was $4,000 a month, and there, at the bottom, was the signature for the cosigner, Leah Martin. It was my name, but it was not my handwriting. I stared at the document. My blood ran cold. The date next to the signature was 3 days ago. "He used my name," I whispered. "He used my credit score." "He said my credit history wasn't long enough," Savannah said, her voice shaking. "And he said he didn't want the debt-to-income ratio on his own report because of the new beach house mortgage. He said you had good credit because you never bought anything. He said you wouldn't mind helping the family. He forged my signature, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He put me on the hook for $50,000 a year of rent for an apartment I will never see. I looked up at Savannah. Did you know? I knew he was handling it, she said, tears welling up. I didn't know he signed your name until I saw the paper. Leah, if I default, if I miss a payment, I get sued. I finished the sentence for her. They come after me. They garnish the wages I just earned. I looked back toward the ballroom. My father was inside, drinking champagne, laughing, trying to rewrite history. He hadn't just insulted me. He hadn't just ignored me. He had financially shackled me to the sister he preferred, using the very stability I had scraped and clawed to build. The victory I had felt 5 minutes ago evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, deadly rage. This wasn't just a dysfunctional family dynamic anymore. This was fraud. This was a crime. I looked at the paper in my hand, then at the ballroom door. Tonight wasn't just a toast, I said, my voice shaking with fury. It was the night I realized they didn't just look down on me. They used me. I folded the paper and put it in my portfolio next to my offer letter. I wasn't leaving anymore. I had one more conversation to have, and this time, Doctor, Pierce wouldn't need to do the talking. I held the document in my hand, feeling the texture of the paper. It was a standard lease agreement, but the weight of it felt like a shackle. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was a clumsy imitation of my handwriting, a loop on the L that I had not used since high school. My father had not just borrowed my name, he had stolen my financial identity to secure a luxury apartment for the sister he deemed more worthy. I turned around. Savannah was standing there, looking pale and terrified. I could see the conflict in her eyes. For 20 years, she had been the beneficiary of my erasure. But tonight, faced with the black and white reality of a felony, she looked like she was finally waking up. "Come with me," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a family that their loved one was not coming home. But this time, I was the one delivering the bad news to the people who caused it. We walked back toward the coat check area where my parents were frantically whispering to each other, likely strategizing how to spin Doctor. Pierce's interruption as a planned surprise. When they saw me approaching with Savannah, my mother forced a smile, but it faltered when she saw the paper in my hand. "Leah," my father said, his voice regaining some of its bluster. "We were just discussing how to handle the PR on this. We can issue a statement saying—" "Stop," I said. I held up the photocopy. "We are not talking about PR. We are talking about fraud." My father glanced at the paper, and for a second, I saw real fear in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, that," he said, forcing a laugh. "Leah, do not be dramatic. It is just a formality. The rental agency needed a co-signer with a longer credit history. Savannah is just starting out. We needed to secure the unit before the semester starts. It is for the family." "For the family?" I repeated. "You forged my signature on a legal document that makes me liable for $48,000 a year. If Savannah misses a payment, my credit is ruined. My security clearance for my new job could be revoked. You put my entire career at risk so she could have a view of the Potomac." "You are being selfish," my mother interjected. Stepping forward, her voice was a hiss. "Your sister needs a safe place to live. You have a job now. You have that high salary, Doctor," Pierce announced. "You can afford to help. Why must you always make everything a conflict? You should sacrifice a little to keep the peace." "Sacrifice?" I looked at her, feeling the last tether of emotional attachment snap. "I paid for my own dress tonight. I paid for my own tuition. I paid into the family trust that funded this party where I was insulted. And now you want me to pay for her rent? That is not sacrifice. Mom, that is theft." "Watch your tone," my father growled, stepping closer. "I am your father. I made a command decision. You will not make a big deal out of this. You will not embarrass us further. I am not making it big, I said, meeting his gaze with zero hesitation. And I am not making it small. I am simply not making it disappear. I pulled out my phone. I have already spoken to a friend of mine who works in fraud detection at the bank. I sent him a picture of this 10 minutes ago. He confirmed that without a notarized power of attorney, which you do not have. This is identity theft. It is a crime, Dad, a crime that gets lawyers disbarred. My father went white. The threat of disbarment was the only thing that terrified him more than irrelevance. You wouldn't, he whispered. I would, I said, and I will. Stop! The voice came from beside me. It was Savannah. She stepped forward, positioning herself between me and our parents. She was shaking, but her chin was up. She is right, Savannah said, her voice trembling. And I am done. I am done letting you use her to prop me up. My parents looked at her in shock. The golden child was going off script. I knew you were looking for an apartment, Savannah said, turning to Dad. But I did not know you signed Leah's name until I saw the papers on your desk. I should have said something then. I didn't, because I was scared, and because I liked the idea of the apartment. I was selfish. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. I am sorry. Leah, I really am. I don't want the apartment. I don't want any of it if it means stealing from you. She looked back at our father. Cancel the lease. Tonight. Right now. My father looked trapped. He looked at me, then at Savannah, then at the bustling party inside where he was supposed to be the hero. He realized he had no leverage left. His own legacy had just turned against him. Fine, he spat, pulling out his phone. I will call the agent. We will put it in my name. I will pay the higher premium. Are you happy now? You have ruined the night. No, I said. You ruined it when you decided I was disposable. I turned to leave, but then I felt a hand on my arm. It was Nora. She had been standing quietly by the door, witnessing the entire exchange. She walked up to my father, who was furiously typing on his phone. You should know, Gordon, Nora said calmly, that I anticipated this. My father looked up. What are you talking about? I know how much you like to leverage assets, Nora said. And I knew once Leah started making real money, you would find a way to tap into it. That is why, 2 weeks ago, I had Leah sit down with my personal accountant. We set up a credit freeze and fraud alerts on all her major accounts. The moment that lease hits the system on Monday morning, it will be flagged automatically. The only reason it hasn't yet is because it is the weekend. I looked at Nora in surprise. I remembered the meeting she had set up, but I hadn't realized the full extent of her foresight. She hadn't just opened doors for me, she had built a fortress around me. So, Nora continued, smiling sweetly at my father, you better make sure that cancellation goes through before 9 in the morning on Monday, or the police will be at your office by noon, and I don't think Holloway and Crane want that kind of publicity. My father slumped against the wall. He looked old. He looked defeated. He had lost face in front of his partners, lost control of his daughters, and been outmaneuvered by his mother-in-law. I took a deep breath. The air felt clean. I am leaving now, I said. Doctor, Pierce and my team are waiting. Do not contact me until you have proof that my name is off that lease. And after that, do not contact me until you can look at me and see a person, not an asset. I walked out of Marigold Terrace. I walked out of the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of vanilla and old money. I walked out into the cool night air where the ambulance was parked, its lights flashing softly in the darkness. Mike and Sarah were leaning against the rig, holding a pizza box. Doctor. Pierce was there too, loosening his tie. When they saw me, they cheered. It wasn't polite applause. It was loud, raucous, genuine joy. Did you get 'em? Mike asked, handing me a slice of pepperoni pizza. Yeah, I said, taking a bite. It tasted better than any sea bass I had ever had. We got 'em. Savannah walked out a moment later. She hesitated, looking at our group. I waved her over. She walked toward us, leaving the golden cage of the ballroom behind. It would take time and a lot of work. But maybe, just maybe, I had a sister after all. We ended the night at the EMS station, sitting on the back bumper of the ambulance, drinking cheap soda and laughing until our sides hurt. I looked around at the faces: Nora, Doctor, Pierce, my partners, my sister. This was my table. This was my legacy. My father had raised a glass to the only child worth celebrating. He wanted a show. He wanted a spotlight. But as I sat there, surrounded by the people who knew the color of my blood and the content of my character, I realized something. That night, they planned to celebrate the worthy child, but what they didn't expect was I stopped asking for permission to be seen. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end. It has been a journey of pain, realization, and finally, justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please comment your country or city below so we can see how far Leah's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more satisfying revenge dramas, please subscribe to the channel Leona Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.